Beneath Leyndell, the royal capital, there's a door sealed with golden grace. Behind that door is a mass grave. Hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other, clutching instruments, still wearing their merchant clothes. These are the nomadic merchants, a peaceful people who traveled the lands between selling goods and singing songs. The Golden Order rounded them up, all of them, every man, woman, and child. They accused them of heresy. They dragged them into the sewers, and they sealed the door. The merchants were buried alive in the dark, screaming, clawing at the walls, suffocating under the weight of their own dead. And from that despair, from that mass grave of innocent people, something was born. The Three Fingers, the Frenzied Flame, the outer god of chaos that wants to burn the entire world to ash. This is the complete story of the merchants, from their persecution by the Golden Order to the birth of the flame that could end everything. As you wander the desolate fields of Limgrave or the scorched cliffs of Caelid, you will eventually stumble across a small campfire. Sitting beside it is usually a lone figure, dressed in vibrant, layered clothing of red, purple, and gold. This is a nomadic merchant. They are the quiet strangers of the lands between, existing in the most isolated and dangerous corners of the world. While the rest of reality is consumed by the war of the demigods, these merchants seem to be waiting for something. They provide a rare moment of safety and commerce in a land that wants you dead. The most striking thing about these merchants is their music. Even from a distance, you can hear the haunting, mournful notes of their stringed instruments. It is a sound that defines the atmosphere of the nomadic camps. It is not the triumphant music of a palace or the holy hymns of a church. It is a song of lament. They play as if they are trying to remember a world that no longer exists. Their presence is a reminder that there is a life outside the grace of the Erd Tree, a life that has been pushed to the very edges of the map. These merchants are a mystery to most players during their first journey. They are friendly but distant, offering goods and advice for a handful of runes. They don't seek the Elden Ring, and they don't serve the Two Fingers. They are the only people who seem to have no stake in the Great Rune War. However, their humble appearance is a mask for a history of profound tragedy. They are not just travelers. They are survivors of a cultural extinction. Every merchant you meet is a living relic of a people who were once the heartbeat of the continent. Their colorful clothing stands out against the grey ruins of the world. These garments are not just for show. They are functional, layered pieces that tell the story of a life spent on the road. They carry their entire world on the backs of their mules, from dried meat to ancient recipes. They are the masters of survival in a dying land. But there is a deep sadness in their eyes that no campfire can warm. They are the remnants of a culture that was silenced long ago, and their music is the only thing they have left to keep the darkness away. As you sit by their fire, you are looking at the final pages of a story that began with a massive caravan and ended in a shallow grave. The nomadic merchants are the ghosts of the lands between. They are the people who lost everything before the shattering even began. To understand who they are, you have to look past their trinkets and listen to the song they are playing. It is a requiem for a people who were buried alive beneath the feet of the gods. The story of the merchants is the story of the Golden Order's greatest and most hidden crime. The people we know today as the nomadic merchants were once part of a massive, thriving ethnic group called the Great Caravan. Long before the shattering broke the world, these people were the primary economic engine of the lands between. They did not live in the stone cities or swear loyalty to a single lord. Instead, they moved in massive wagon trains, creating a network of trade that connected every kingdom from the mountaintops of the giants to the southern shores of Limgrave. They were the blood in the veins of the continent, moving goods and ideas across borders that others feared to cross. They were defined by their absolute neutrality. In a world where everyone was eventually forced to choose a side, the Erdtree, the Carians, or the Volcano Manor, the Great Caravan chose none. They traded with everyone. They provided the supplies that built the great monuments of Leyndell and the artifacts used in the sorcery schools of Raya Lucaria. This neutrality was not a lack of conviction, but a cultural philosophy. They believed that the road belonged to everyone, and that commerce was a way to keep the peace. They were a people of the path, not the throne. Their bond with one another was legendary. They were an oral culture, sharing news and stories through their songs. If you were part of the Great Caravan, you were never truly alone, no matter how far you traveled. They had their own internal traditions and a unique language of music that allowed them to communicate across vast distances. They were a society that valued movement over stability. To them, the Erdtree was a beautiful landmark, but it was not their god. Their loyalty was to the caravan and to the family members who shared the long journey. This independence made them incredibly successful, but it also made them outsiders. They were a people who could not be easily taxed, governed, or indoctrinated. They lived in the in-between spaces of the world, making them a source of fascination and eventually suspicion. To the common folk, they were a welcome sight, bringing news from distant lands. But to the architects of the Golden Order, they were an anomaly. They were a large, organized group of people who existed outside the direct control of the Erdtree's grace. The Great Caravan was a masterpiece of nomadic logistics. They managed massive herds, maintained complex wagons, and protected their wealth through wit as much as through steel. They were the ultimate travelers. But their success was their undoing. In the eyes of a fundamentalist regime, a successful group that refuses to bow is a threat that cannot be tolerated. The Great Caravan was a civilization on wheels, and the Golden Order decided that the wheels had to be stopped. They were a people who lived for the road, and they were about to find that the road led to a dead end. Music was the soul of the Great Caravan. For the merchants, their stringed instruments were not just for entertainment during a long night in the wild. They were vital cultural tools. They used music to preserve their history, to teach their children, and to send signals to other caravans across the hills. A specific melody could warn of danger, while another could announce the arrival of rare goods. And their culture was built on the vibration of strings. This musical heritage is why, even in their broken state today, they refuse to put down their instruments. The music is their identity. As traders, they were the only true bridge between the isolated settlements of the pre-shattering era. They carried everything. A single merchant wagon might contain basic survival gear like torches and meat, but it could also hide rare artifacts from lost civilizations. They were the curators of the world's treasures. If you needed a specific spice from the east or a particular stone from the north, you waited for the Great Caravan. They made the lands between feel like a single, connected world. They were the ones who made civilization possible by ensuring that resources were never stuck in one place. Their trading philosophy was based on the fair exchange. They were not seen as greedy profiteers, but as essential partners. They established a system of nomadic outposts and hidden caches that allowed them to survive in any environment. This deep cultural bond meant that a merchant in the snow-covered north felt a direct connection to a merchant in the southern woods. They were a web of eyes and ears across the continent. This shared knowledge made them the most informed people in the world. They knew the secrets of the lords and the struggles of the peasants. This culture was also deeply tied to their layered clothing. The patterns and colors of their robes were a visual language. They signaled their rank within the caravan, their family lineage, and the regions they had traveled. When a merchant died, their clothes and their music were passed down to the next generation. They were a people of continuity. They didn't build stone monuments to their ancestors. They wore their ancestors' history on their backs. This gave them a sense of permanence that was independent of the land. The tragedy of the Great Caravan is that this vibrant, colorful culture was silenced in an instant. The music that once filled the highways of the world was forced into the shadows. When the roundup began, their instruments were smashed and their wagons were burned. The trade networks that had sustained the world for centuries were dismantled. The Golden Order didn't just want their goods. They wanted to erase the very idea of a nomadic life. They wanted to replace the music of the road with the silence of the law. The Great Caravan was a masterpiece of human spirit, and it was broken for the crime of being free. The Golden Order was built on the principles of absolute uniformity and divine control. Under the rule of Queen Marika and the guidance of the Greater Will, everything in the lands between was supposed to have a designated place within the hierarchy. The Erd Tree was the center of all life, and the grace was the currency of a soul's worth. The merchants were a problem because they did not fit into this rigid structure. They were nomads who owed no direct fealty to the throne. They were a large, influential group that lived by its own rules, and to the fundamentalists in Leyndell, this was a poison. This fear was rooted in the concept of regression. The Golden Order's scholars believed that all things should ultimately return to the Erd Tree. The merchants, by their very nature, represented the opposite. They were people of wandering. They moved away from the center. They explored the fringes of the world. This independence was viewed as a spiritual threat. The Golden Order could not tolerate a people who found meaning in the road rather than the tree. The fundamentalists believed that if you were not bound to the Erd Tree, you were a potential vessel for something else. There was also a deep-seated paranoia regarding the merchants' neutrality. Because they traded with everyone, the Golden Order feared that they were secretly aiding the enemies of the Erd Tree. They saw the merchants' knowledge of the world as a form of intelligence gathering. They worried that the music of the caravan was carrying secret messages or heretical ideas. The merchants were the only group that could move through the various kingdoms without being stopped, making them the perfect scapegoat for any problem the gods couldn't solve. Their freedom was rebranded as a lack of loyalty. The persecution began with small restrictions. Merchants were barred from certain cities, and their trade routes were taxed into bankruptcy. The Golden Order tried to force them to settle down and become sedentary subjects, but the Great Caravan refused. They had been nomadic for generations, and they were not going to give up their identity for the sake of a god they didn't worship. This resistance only fueled the fires of hatred in the capital. The fundamentalists began to look for a legal and religious justification to dismantle the caravan entirely. They needed a reason to turn the people against the travelers. This search for a reason led to one of the most horrific frame-ups in history. The Golden Order didn't just want to stop the trade. They wanted to destroy the people. They characterized the merchants' otherness as a sign of corruption. They claimed that the colorful clothes and the strange music were masks for a dark heresy. The persecution was a calculated effort to dehumanize a culture that the gods could not control. It was the first step toward a genocide that would be hidden beneath the floors of the capital. The Golden Order prized order, and the merchants were the chaos that had to be removed. The downfall of the Great Caravan was triggered by a single man named Shabriri. In the lore of Elden Ring, Shabriri is described as the most reviled man in all of history. He was a master of slander and a vessel for chaos. Shabriri approached the leaders of the Golden Order with a devastating accusation. He claimed that the merchants of the Great Caravan were secretly harboring heretical beliefs. He told the fundamentalists that the merchants were planning to summon the Frenzied Flame, an outer god of total destruction, to burn down the Erd Tree and the world. Whether the merchants were actually guilty or if Shabriri framed them is a major point of debate among scholars. Most evidence suggests that the merchants were innocent. They were a people of trade and music, not cosmic apocalypse. However, the Golden Order was looking for exactly this kind of excuse. Shabriri's lie was perfect because it played on the gods' deepest fears. It took the merchants' neutrality and rebranded it as a secret allegiance to the most terrifying force in existence. It turned the nomadic strangers into a domestic terror threat that had to be dealt with immediately. The accusation provided the legal and moral justification for a total ethnic purge. Under the laws of the Golden Order, heresy against the Erd Tree was the highest crime. If the merchants were truly seeking the Frenzied Flame, they were not just criminals. They were a threat to the fabric of reality. This allowed the Golden Order to bypass any traditional notions of justice. They didn't need a trial for every merchant. They declared the entire Great Caravan guilty by association. They used the fear of the flame to whip the population into a frenzy of hatred against the travelers. Shabriri himself paid a high price for his slander. It is said his eyes were gouged out as punishment for his lies, yet he became the first person to be burned by the frenzy he claimed to fear. This irony is the heart of the tragedy. Even if the merchants were innocent when the accusation was made, the Golden Order's reaction would eventually make Shabriri's lie come true. By accusing them of harboring the flame, the gods set in motion the very events that would birth the Three Fingers. Shabriri was the spark that started a fire that would eventually threaten to consume the entire lands between. The roundup began shortly after the accusation was made public. There was no room for defense or appeal. The Golden Order launched a massive military operation to seize every man, woman, and child associated with the Great Caravan. The people who had provided the world with its goods were now being hunted as monsters. Shabriri's slander had turned a thriving civilization into a target for genocide. The heresy of the merchants was a fabrication used to solve a political problem, and the cost was the total destruction of a peaceful people. Once the accusation of heresy was solidified, the Golden Order launched a military operation of staggering scale. This was not a selective arrest of leaders. It was a total roundup of an entire ethnic group. Soldiers and knights were dispatched to every corner of the continent with a single mission: to seize every member of the Great Caravan. They targeted the wagon trains on the roads, the camps in the hills, and the individual traders in the villages. They ignored the merchants' pleas of innocence and their history of service to the kingdoms. To the Golden Order, every colourful robe was now a uniform of treason. The violence of the roundup was absolute. The massive, beautiful wagons that had carried the world's treasures were systematically burned. The herds of mules and horses that sustained the nomadic life were seized or slaughtered. The merchants' assets, their rare artifacts, their gold, and their survival supplies were stripped away by the state. Families were torn apart in the chaos. The Golden Order wanted to ensure that the nomadic way of life could never be rebuilt. They were not just arresting people. They were destroying the physical infrastructure of a culture. The most horrific part of the roundup was that it included everyone. The Golden Order did not spare the elderly or the children. Because the heresy was seen as a biological or cultural taint, they believed that the entire lineage had to be contained. Thousands of people who had never done anything but play music and trade salt were chained together and marched toward the capital. This was a forced march of a defeated people. The roads that they had once traveled as masters were now the paths to their eternal imprisonment. The public reaction to the roundup was likely one of fear and complicity. Because the Golden Order had characterized the merchants as harbingers of the Frenzied Flame, the common folk were too terrified to intervene. They watched as their friends and suppliers were dragged away in chains, believing that the gods were protecting them from a hidden evil. The silence of the lands between during this purge is one of the most tragic elements of the law. The people who had been the bridge between kingdoms were now being abandoned by everyone they had served. The merchants were not taken to a traditional prison or an execution ground. The Golden Order had a more terrifying fate in mind. They wanted to hide the evidence of their crime where no one would ever see it. They were taking the entire Great Caravan to the heart of the capital city, Leyndell. But they weren't taking them to the palaces or the gardens. They were taking them down into the dark. The roundup was the beginning of a journey into a living grave, a place where the sun would never shine, and the music of the caravan would finally be silenced by the weight of the earth. The captured members of the Great Caravan were taken to the lowest depths of the capital city, Leyndell. They were brought to the subterranean shunning-grounds, a sprawling and nightmarish complex of sewers, pipes, and stone chambers hidden directly beneath the holy city. This was the dumping ground for everything the Golden Order considered impure. It was where the omens, children born with horns who were rejected by the Erd Tree, were kept in chains. It was a place of filth, stagnation, and absolute darkness. But for the merchants, and even the shunning-grounds were not deep enough. The Golden Order didn't just want to shun the merchants, they wanted to erase them. They were marched past the sewer pipes and the weeping omens, deeper into the very foundations of the earth. They were taken to a place where the air was thin and the stone was ancient. This area was a massive hollowed-out cavern that existed below the deepest roots of the Erd Tree. It was a geological void that had been repurposed as a massive ethnic-scale prison. The merchants were forced down into this pit, thousands of them packed together in the dark. The geography of the shunning-grounds is a physical map of the Golden Order's hypocrisy. Above, in the streets of Leyndell, there was gold, light, and the music of worship. Directly below, there was excrement, blood, and the silence of the discarded. The fact that the most sacred city in the world was sitting on top of a massive mass grave is the ultimate indictment of Marika's rule. The shunning-grounds were the shadow of the Erda tree, the place where all the failures of the system were swept. The merchants were the final, largest addition to this pile of human misery. Life in the shunning-grounds was a descent into madness. The merchants had no food, no light, and no hope of escape. They were surrounded by the stone walls of a city they had once helped to build. The sound of the water in the pipes above was a constant reminder of a world that was continuing without them. They were treated as non-entities, left to rot in a place that the official maps of the capital didn't even acknowledge. Just the Golden Order had turned the foundation of their civilization into a tomb for the people who had sustained it. The shunning-grounds are a place of absolute stagnation. It is the opposite of the wandering life the merchants loved. They were people of the open road and the sky, and they were trapped in a stone throat. This physical confinement was a form of spiritual torture. The Golden Order knew that by taking away their movement, they were killing the soul of the people before the body even died. The merchants were left in the dark to face a fate that was far worse than a quick execution. They were being buried alive under the weight of the gold they had once traded. At the absolute lowest point of the shunning-grounds, past the mazes of pipes and the hidden elevators, lies the Frenzied Flame, proscription. This is the deepest part of the earth, reachable by man. It is a massive, cathedral-like chamber of jagged stone. But the most significant feature of this place is the door. It is a gargantuan stone portal that was magically warded and sealed by Queen Marika herself. It was intended to be an absolute barrier, a seal that no sound, no soul, and no god could ever pass through. This was the proscription, the place where the forbidden was to be forgotten forever. The door was more than just a physical barrier. It was a religious statement. By sealing this area, Marika was attempting to lock away the consequences of her actions. She was trying to create a perfect world by physically walling off the imperfect. Behind this door, the thousands of arrested merchants were abandoned. There were no guards on the inside because there was no need for them. There was no way out. The Golden Order had transformed a religious accusation into a physical reality. They had created a tomb for an entire culture and put the Queen's seal on the front of it. The atmosphere in front of the door is one of intense, vibrating dread. The stone itself seems to hum with a hidden energy. Even before you open it, the player can feel the pressure of the despair on the other side. This area was meant to be the end of the line. Marika believed that by sealing the merchants in this pit, she was protecting her order from the Frenzied Flame. She didn't realize that the act of sealing them was the very ritual required to summon it. The proscription was the kiln, and the merchants were the fuel. The door remains one of the most mysterious and terrifying objects in Elden Ring. It requires the player to be naked and unarmed to open it, symbolizing a total surrender of the self to the chaos within. It is a door that can only be opened by those who have already lost everything, just like the people trapped behind it. The Golden Order's proscription was a desperate attempt to maintain control over a world that was already beginning to fracture. They believed that if they couldn't see the suffering, it didn't exist. Ultimately, the sealed door is the monument to the Golden Order's failure. It shows that Marika's order was a fragile lie that required a massive amount of hidden violence to sustain. The door didn't keep the chaos out, it kept the victims in until their pain became a god. When the player finally finds this place, they are uncovering the deepest and darkest secret of the capital. The Frenzied Flame proscription is the site of a genocide that was so horrific, the gods had to hide it under 1,000 feet of stone. The door is the only thing left of a people who were silenced by a queen's fear. When the player finally passes beyond the sealed doors and descends into the heart of the proscription, the full scale of the atrocity is revealed. The chamber is not empty. It is a vertical tomb filled with the bodies of thousands of merchants. They are piled on top of one another in the dark, a chaotic heap of colourful rags and brittle bone. This was a mass grave for the living. The Golden Order did not kill these people before throwing them into the pit. They simply herded them into the dark, sealed the exit, and left them to starve, suffocate, and rot in total silence. The physical evidence of their final moments is everywhere. You see corpses huddled together, clutching their instruments or their family members. There are no signs of a struggle against an external enemy. The struggle was against the walls and the hunger. They were a people who lived for the open horizon, and they died in a stone throat where they couldn't even stand up straight. The sheer number of bodies is a testament to the efficiency of the Golden Order's roundup. They didn't miss anyone. They took the entire Great Caravan and turned it into a layer of the earth. As they lay in the dark, the merchants began to wail. This was not just the sound of individuals dying. It was a collective scream of a culture being extinguished. Because they were a musical people, their final expressions of pain were rhythmic and melodic. They sang their death. The sound of thousands of people screaming in a confined stone space created a vibration that began to warp the very nature of reality. Their despair was so concentrated and so pure that it acted as a beacon. They were calling out for anything that could end their suffering, even if that something meant the end of the world. This mass grave is the most honest location in Leyndell. While the surface of the city is covered in gold leaf and holy symbols, the foundation is built on this pile of human misery. The Golden Order believed that by burying the merchants, they were burying their problems. But you cannot bury that much pain without it eventually boiling over. The mass grave became a pressure cooker of spiritual energy. The merchants didn't just die. They became a singular collective entity of shared hatred. They were the dirt beneath the feet of the gods, and they were beginning to turn into fire. The sight of the corpses still clutching their violins is perhaps the most tragic detail. Even at the end of the world, they tried to maintain their identity. They played until their fingers rotted. They were a people who were silenced by the earth, but refused to stop making noise. The mass grave is a monument to the fact that the Golden Order was never about life. It was about the control of life. And when life could not be controlled, it was discarded. The merchants in the pit are the true cost of Marika's peace. In the center of that absolute darkness and agony, something impossible happened. The collective despair of the merchants reached a fever pitch that cracked the barrier between worlds. Their shared hatred for the Golden Order and their desire for an end to all disparity acted as a great incantation. From the heap of the dying and the dead, the three fingers manifested. This was not an ancient god that had always been there. The three fingers were born directly from the merchant's scream. They are the physical embodiment of a people who wanted to melt the world back into a state where no one could ever be othered again. The appearance of the three fingers is a grotesque reflection of the two fingers who serve the greater will. Where the two fingers represent order, law, and the division of things, the three fingers represent chaos, fire, and the union of all things. They are a hand that has been warped and expanded by the sheer volume of souls that birthed it. They represent the missing pieces of the world's logic. They are the answer to a prayer that was made in a language of pure pain. The merchants wanted the world to stop, and the three fingers are the entity that can make that happen. This birth is the ultimate irony of the Golden Order. Marika feared the Frenzied Flame, so she buried the people she suspected of harboring it. But by putting thousands of tortured souls in one single location and sealing them off, she provided the exact environment needed for the flame to ignite. The three fingers are Marika's own creation. They are the shadow of her genocide. The outer god of frenzy didn't invade the world. It was invited in by the victims of the Erd Tree. The merchant's despair was the womb for a new, chaotic divinity. The message of the three fingers is simple. May chaos take the world. This is not a call for evil or for power. It is a plea for the end of suffering. The three fingers believed that the mistake was the greater will creating life, division, and individual souls in the first place. If everything is melted back into the yellow ember, then there can be no more slavery, no more genocide, and no more shunning. The three fingers are the god of the broken, offering a mercy that looks like an apocalypse. They are the merchant's revenge against a world that wouldn't let them wander. When the player encounters the three fingers, they are not met with a lecture or a battle. They are met with a burning embrace. The entity sears its fingerprints into your flesh, passing the merchant's madness directly into your soul. You become the vessel for their collective will. The three fingers are the ultimate evidence that you cannot bury the truth forever. Eventually, the scream in the dark will find a mouth. The merchants are gone, but their god is here, and it is waiting to burn the world that tried to forget them. Among all the colourful nomads scattered across the world, Merchant Kale is unique. You find him early in your journey, sitting in the ruins of the Church of Elden in Limgrave. He is one of the very few members of the Great Caravan who was not caught in the original roundup. Perhaps he was too far north, or perhaps he was hidden by the mists of the coast. Regardless of how he survived, he now lives in a state of quiet, suppressed trauma. He is a man who knows that his culture is a ghost. He acts as a humble trader, but he is the last sane link to a civilization that has been erased from the surface of the earth. Kale's personality is defined by a deep, weary kindness. He is the first person to truly help the tarnished, offering a spirit-calling bell from a friend and warning you about the dangers of the road. But if you listen to his idle dialogue, you can hear the survivor's guilt in his voice. He refers to himself and his kin as the nomadic people, but he speaks of the caravan in the past tense. He is a man who is waiting for a family that will never return. He sits by his small fire in a broken church, a tiny point of light in a world that has become a graveyard for his people. The tragedy of Kale is his isolation. He is a social creature in a world where he is the only one left of his kind. He watches the tarnished come and go, knowing that he is just a remnant of a trade network that once moved the world. He doesn't seek power or runes. He just wants to survive long enough to remember. He is the keeper of the songs and the stories, but he has no children to pass them to. He is a dead end in the lineage of the Great Caravan. His vibrant red clothing is a flag of a nation that no longer exists. Kale represents the human face of the genocide, while the three fingers are the cosmic response to the tragedy. Kale is the personal one. He shows us what was actually lost: a gentle, musical, and helpful people. He is proof that the Golden Order's accusation of heresy was a lie. Kale isn't a monster or a cultist. He is a man who sells hats and telescopes. His existence is a standing protest against the propaganda of the capital. He is the witness that the gods couldn't silence, and his survival is a thorn in the side of the Golden Order's narrative. Ultimately, Kale's story is a slow burn of realization. In the base game, he stays in his church, but in the heart of the law, he is the one searching for the truth. He is the one who eventually leads the player's thoughts toward the sewers. He is the prologue to the nightmare. When you see him sitting in that quiet church, you are seeing the calm before the storm. Kale is the last merchant alive, and his loneliness is the quietest scream in the lands between. He is the final spark of a fire that the gods tried to put out, and that spark is about to ignite a forest. In the deep files of the game and the environmental clues of the world, a much darker journey for Kale is revealed. Originally, Kale had a full quest line that followed his search for the lost Great Caravan. He was not content to sit in the Church of LA forever. He wanted to find his brothers and sisters. This journey eventually led him to the capital city and down into the subterranean shunning-grounds. He followed the trail of his people's music, descending deeper and deeper into the dark, until he finally reached the sealed door of the proscription. The moment Kale discovers the mass grave is the moment his spirit finally breaks. In the cut dialogue, his voice is filled with an agonizing, raw despair. He looks at the thousands of corpses and realizes that the order he lived under was not a benevolent system of grace, but a genocidal regime. He sees the instruments and the clothes of his family members rotting in the mud. The realization that they were buried alive while he was wandering the surface is too much for him to bear. He stops being a merchant and becomes a vessel for the same hatred that birthed the Three Fingers. This discovery changes Kale's view of the Tarnished and the world. He stops caring about trade or runes. He realizes that the only justice left for his people is the total destruction of the world that murdered them. He begs the player to find the Three Fingers and to burn it all to ash. He becomes the primary advocate for the Frenzied Flame ending. His questline proves that the merchants didn't start as heretics. They were driven to it. Their evil is a direct reaction to the goodness of the Golden Order. Kale is the bridge between the victim and the revenger. The loss of this questline in the final version of the game actually makes the environmental storytelling more potent. When the player finds the mass grave on their own, they are seeing what Kale was searching for. They are finishing his journey. The silent merchants playing their violins in the pit are the ghosts of Kale's family. Even without his dialogue, the tragedy is clear. The Order is a lie built on a pile of bodies. Kale's despair is the invisible weight that hangs over every merchant camp in the game. He is the one who survived to find out that survival was a curse. Kale's journey is the moral compass of the Frenzied Flame. It asks the player a difficult question. Does a world that is capable of this deserve to continue? Kale answers with a resounding no. He represents the righteous fury of the silenced. He is the one who reminds us that the order of the Erd Tree required a genocide to maintain its purity. When you see him in the church, after visiting the sewers, you can never look at him the same way again. He is a man sitting on a secret that is hot enough to melt the stars. Part 13. The Nomadic Merchant's Bell. Bearing. One of the grimmest mechanics in Elden Ring is the bell-bearing system. When the player decides to kill a nomadic merchant, an act of pure, unnecessary cruelty, they receive a small metallic object that contains the merchant's vocalization. You can take these bell bearings to the Twin Maiden husks in the Round Table hold. By offering the bearing, the husks are able to mimic the dead merchant's shop, allowing the player to buy their goods even after they are gone. This is a subtle but horrific reminder of how the world views the merchants. They are nothing more than repositories of goods to be exploited. The bell bearing is a sonic fingerprint. It captures the merchant's essence and reduces it to a menu of items. It is the ultimate commodification of a soul. In life, the merchants were valued for their trade, and in death, the Golden Order and the Tarnished find a way to keep that trade going. The merchants are not allowed to find peace or to have their stories ended. They are turned into bells that ring with the sound of commerce. This treatment mirrors the roundup in Leyndell. The state didn't want the people, they wanted the assets. For the player, the bell bearing is a convenience. It allows you to have all the shops in one central location. But this convenience is built on murder. It highlights the instrumental nature of the Tarnished's journey. To become Elden Lord, you are often encouraged to step over the bodies of the weak. Each bell bearing in your inventory is a silenced voice, a merchant who was killed for the sake of a few more arrows or a crafting recipe. The husks in the hold are just the latest processors of the merchant's remains. The name Nomadic Merchant's Bell Bearing is itself a tragedy. It suggests that even the nomadic part of their identity is now a fixed metallic object. They are no longer wandering, they are trapped in a shop menu. The music they once played is replaced by the clinking of coins. This is the order of the world at its most clinical and cold. It turns a living culture into a list of prices. The merchants are the only group in the game whose souls are used in this specific, commercial way. They are the eternal servants of the economy. Ultimately, the bell bearing is the player's personal connection to the merchant's persecution. Just every time you kill one for a convenience, you are repeating the sin of the Golden Order. You are deciding that your needs are more important than their lives. The Song of Lament is replaced by the silence of the Twin Maiden husks. The bell bearing is a small, cold object that carries the weight of a life that was discarded for a handful of runes. It is the final sale of a people who were never allowed to own their own destiny. Part 14. The Fingerprint Shield. Made from merchant corpses. Deep in the vertical maze of the mass grave, hidden behind a series of treacherous jumping puzzles, lies the fingerprint stone shield. This is one of the most famous and powerful items in the game, but its lore is truly nightmarish. The shield is a massive slab of stone, and its description implies that it was hewn from the very rock of the proscription. But the most disturbing part is the surface of the shield. It is covered in the dense, overlapping fingerprints of those who were buried alive in that pit. It is a physical record of thousands of people trying to claw their way out of a stone tomb. The shield has the highest stability of any shield in the game. In the mechanics of Elden Ring, stability determines how much stamina is lost when blocking an attack. The lore implication is clear. The shield is stable because it carries the unyielding, immovable weight of the merchant's despair. The thousands of people who died behind that door were stable in their hatred. They were fixed in their agony. The shield is not made of metal or wood. It is made of the physical stain of a genocide. It is a weapon of defense made from the absolute failure of protection. Using the Fingerprint Shield is a grim irony for the tarnished. You are using the remains of the Golden Order's victims to protect yourself, while you try to become the next leader of the Golden Order. Every blow you block with that stone is a blow that is absorbed by the fingerprints of the dead. You are literally hiding behind the corpses of the Great Caravan. The shield also causes madness build-up, suggesting that the frenzy of the merchants is still radiating from the stone. It is a cursed object that carries the heat of the pit into the world above. The fingerprints are the only signature the merchants were allowed to leave. They were denied names, songs, and lives, so they left their marks on the stone. They clawed until their fingers were gone. The shield is a scream frozen in rock. It represents the solidification of grief. While the three fingers are the spiritual result of the pit, the shield is the physical result. It is a piece of the mass grave that you can carry with you. It is a heavy, ugly, and indestructible reminder of what happens when you bury your problems alive. Ultimately, the fingerprint stone shield is the ultimate burden of the law. It is a tool of survival born from total extinction. It shows that even the stone of the earth was changed by the merchant's suffering. When you hold it, you are holding the final, desperate struggle of 1,000 families. The shield doesn't block out the world, it blocks out the light. It is a piece of the proscription that has escaped into the world, a heavy slab of no that refuses to let the fire of the soul through. It is the merchant's final, silent stay back to the world that murdered them. Part 15, Shabriri, the first to spread the flame. Shabriri is the original sin of the Frenzied Flame. In the lore, he is described as a man who was once a normal human, but he committed the crime of slander against the Great Caravan. For this, his eyes were gouged out, and he was cast out from society. But Shabriri did not die. He became the first vessel for the Frenzied Flame. He realized that his lie about the merchants was actually a prophecy. He became the apostle of chaos, wandering the world to find others who are broken enough to embrace the fire. He is the one who gave the merchants' despair a name and a purpose. Shabriri is a parasite. He does not have his own body anymore. In the game, he inhabits the corpse of Yura, the hunter of bloody fingers. He uses the faces of those we trust to deliver his message of total destruction. He is a master of rhetoric. He doesn't tell the player to be evil. He tells the player to be kind. He argues that life is a cycle of births and tears, and the only way to be compassionate is to end life entirely. He uses the tragedy of the merchants as his primary recruiting tool. He shows you the pit, shows you the pain, and asks, "Don't you want to stop this?" He is the first to spread the flame, because he was the first to realize that the Golden Order's perfection was a lie. He saw that the light required shadow to exist, and he decided to burn both. Shabriri is the voice of the Three Fingers, he is the intellectual justification for the apocalypse. He is a terrifying figure because he isn't wrong about the suffering of the world. He just has the most extreme solution possible. He is the man who looked into the void and decided it was better than the gold. The fact that Shabriri inhabits Yura is a final cruelty to the player. Yura was a noble man who spent his life hunting bloody fingers to protect the innocent. To see his body hijacked by the Apostle of Frenzy is a visceral reminder that the flame respects nothing. Shabriri is a vessel of entropy. He represents the way that a single lie can spiral into a cosmic disaster. He started with a slander against a caravan, and he ended with a fire that can melt the Elden Ring. He is the grandfather of the merchant's revenge. Ultimately, Shabriri is the character who turns the lore into a choice. He forces the player to look at the mass grave and decide if the world is worth saving. He is the one who whispers, "May chaos take the world," in your ear. He is a man made of words and ash, a ghost of a crime that never ended. Without Shabriri, the merchant's pain might have just stayed in the pit. He is the one who gave the fire legs. He is the first to spread the flame, and if he has his way, he will be the last one left to see it burn. Part 16. Hyetta's Pilgrimage. Following the Suffering. Following the path of Shabriri is Hyetta, the mysterious maiden who appears after the death of Irina. Hyetta's pilgrimage is a physical reenactment of the merchant's journey. She wanders from the cliffs of Leonia toward the capital. She's searching for a distant light that she can only see with her mind. She is blind, just like Irina, and she relies on the player to feed her Shabriri grapes. As she eats these eyeballs of the dead, she begins to see the truth of the world. She is the Maiden of the Flame, the one who leads the player down into the proscription to meet the Three Fingers. Hyetta represents the spiritualization of the merchant's suffering. She is a gentle, fragile figure who is being built by the agony of others. Each grape she eats is a piece of the history we've discussed. One grape from a revenger, one from a victim on a bridge, and one from the mass grave. She is ingesting the genocide. She doesn't realize what the grapes are at first, and when she finds out, she is horrified. But she eventually accepts it. She realizes that the light she is seeking is the fire that comes from total despair. She is the holy face of the apocalypse. Her pilgrimage leads her to the deepest part of the sewers. When she stands before the sealed door, she is the only one who can explain what the Three Fingers want. She speaks of the One, the primordial state of reality before the greater will created division and birth. She explains that the merchant's suffering is the evidence that life was a mistake. She is the philosopher of the frenzy. She takes the raw, screaming pain of the pit and turns it into a religious doctrine. She is the mother of the new age of chaos. The connection between Hyetta and Irina is the final unmaking of the peninsula's story. If Hyetta is Irina's body, then the blind girl has finally found a purpose. But that purpose is the destruction of everything. Her pilgrimage is a journey from innocence to insanity. She is the perfect maiden for a god that has no eyes. She shows that the frenzy is not just for the mad, it is for the kind. She believes that by burning the world, she is performing an act of ultimate compassion. She is following the suffering all the way to its source. Ultimately, Hyetta's pilgrimage is the ritual that prepares the player for the burn. She is the one who tells you to strip off your armor and embrace the fingers. She is the witness to your transformation. When she finally blooms into a spirit of flame at the end of her quest, she is the final gift of the merchants to the world. She is the girl who saw the dark, and her vision is what guides you into the void. Hyetta is the requiem in human form, a maiden of ash who leads her lord to the fire. Part 17. The Frenzied Flame. Ending. The Merchant's Revenge. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is often dismissed as the bad conclusion, but for the remnants of the Great Caravan, it is the only form of justice left in a broken universe. When the player chooses to inherit the flame, they are not simply choosing a path of destruction for the sake of power. They are becoming the final, catastrophic instrument of a genocide's retaliation. By burning the world to ash, the player melts away every boundary, every law, and every social hierarchy that allowed the Golden Order to thrive. This is the merchant's final answer to the gods. If a world is built on the systematic torture and burial of an entire culture, then that world has forfeited its right to exist. This ending represents a total and irreversible unmaking of reality as the lands between knows it. It is a violent rejection of the Erd Tree, the greater will, and the very concept of divine order. The merchants were persecuted and buried because they were other, because they were nomadic, and because they existed outside the state's control. By unleashing the flame, the player removes the possibility of otherness entirely. In the yellow kiln of the apocalypse, there are no masters to give orders and no slaves to follow them. There are no pure nobles and no impure merchants. Everything is returned to the primordial soup of the One, where disparity can never grow again. The visual of the player's head being replaced by a raging, chaotic sun serves as the ultimate symbol of this historical revenge. The vision that was stolen from the merchants when their eyes were cooked into Shabriri grapes is now the only vision that remains in the universe. The player literally sees the world through the lens of the merchant's collective agony. Every castle that falls and every god that withers is a payment for the centuries of silence in the sewers. This is not a conquest of the lands between. It is a total deletion of the canvas. The merchant's revenge is the absolute silence that follows the roar of the fire. There is a terrifying, nihilistic beauty in this conclusion. It is the only ending where the true underclass of the world is granted a voice that cannot be ignored. The Golden Order spent eons trying to quiet the merchants, and the Frenzied Flame is the roar that they were never meant to hear. It is a suicide mission for the universe. The merchants do not want to rule over the ruins or sit on a new throne. They want the world to be over. They have suffered so much disparity that they only crave the unity of the void. The flame provides that unity by destroying the vessels that once contained separate souls. Queen Marika's fear of the flame is what ultimately guaranteed its victory. When the screen fades to yellow and the music stops, the merchants have finally found their freedom from the earth. They are no longer buried in the dark foundations of Leyndell. They have become the fire that has consumed the capital and everything it stood for. The revenge of the Great Caravan is a fire that leaves nothing behind to be governed. It is the end of the history of the Golden Order and the beginning of a silence that will never be broken by the laws of gods. Part 18. The Music of the Merchants. A Requiem for the Dead. The song the nomadic merchants play is far more than a simple background melody for a traveler. It is the song of lament. It is the sonic fingerprint of a people who were silenced by the earth but refused to stop singing their pain. In the open world, the song sounds lonely and weary, a faint echo of a culture on the brink of extinction. But when you descend into the depths of the shunning-grounds, the music takes on a much darker and more visceral tone. You find a few surviving mad merchants sitting among the heaps of their dead kin, still plucking at their strings. They have been playing this requiem for centuries in the dark. This music is the only cultural artifact they were able to keep. They lost their wagons, their families, and their eyes, but the song remained etched in their souls. In the darkness of the mass grave, the music serves as a way to map the despair. The notes are slow, dragging, and filled with a dissonant grief that vibrates through the stone. 'Tis the sound of a culture rotting in real time. For any player, Hearing this music deep underground is a haunting experience. It proves that even in a place where hope is physically impossible, the human spirit will still try to create art from its own agony. The Song of Lament is also a powerful and forbidden ritual. Lore implies that the music itself helped to summon the Three Fingers into existence. The vibration of thousands of people playing the same sorrowful tune in a confined stone space acted as a massive unconscious incantation. They literally sang the chaos into the world. Their instruments were not just for music. They were the wands of their own destruction. This turns their music from a sign of weakness into a source of primal power. They didn't have swords to fight back against the knights of Leyndell, so they used their voices and their strings. There is a deep irony in the fact that their oral culture is what preserved the heresy the Golden Order feared. By trying to erase their history, the gods forced that history to become a weapon. The music is a contagion of memory that moves from merchant to merchant. When a player hears a merchant in Limgrave and then hears the same melody in the pit, the connection is immediate and devastating. The song bridges the gap between the living surface and the dead foundation. It is a requiem that refuses to end until the world that caused the lament is gone. The merchants turned their prison into a concert hall of the apocalypse. You can kill a person, but it is much harder to kill a melody that is born from this kind of profound injustice. The music of the merchants is the heartbeat of the Frenzied Flame. It is the sound of the small people finally being heard by a god who listens to screams. As the world burns, the song continues, a final and unyielding reminder of the people who were buried alive. It is the sound of a tragedy that will never be forgotten because it has become the end of the world. Part 19. Why the Golden Order couldn't tolerate them. The Golden Order was never just a religious institution. It was a metaphysical monopoly on the nature of reality. The core pillars of this order were the principles of regression and causality. Regression is the idea that all things must yearn to return to their singular source, the Erd Tree. Causality is the law that keeps the world functioning in a predictable and ordered way. The merchants represented a fundamental violation of both. They were people of wandering and entropy. They moved away from the center, crossed borders without permission, and lived in a state of constant, unpredictable change. Their refusal to be bound to a single location or a single god made them an ideological threat to the capital. In the eyes of the Golden Order fundamentalists, if you were not rooted to the tree, you were suspicious. The nomadic life suggested there were truths and values that existed outside the Erd Tree's light. The merchants were a fluid culture in a rigid world. They traded with impure beings like the misbegotten and the omens, treating them as customers rather than monsters. To a regime obsessed with purity, this mixing of the world's elements was a slow-acting poison that threatened to dissolve the hierarchy. The Golden Order also feared the merchants' vast and secret network. Because the Great Caravan was a continent-wide web of communication, they held a form of soft power the gods couldn't control. They knew the secrets of every region and the weaknesses of every lord. They were the keepers of the world's data in an era before books. Information is a threat to any regime built on propaganda and divine mystery. The fundamentalists believed the merchants were a shadow state that could move ideas faster than the Golden Order could suppress them. The Purge was a logistical genocide designed to kill the world's only source of independent information. There was a deep racial component to this intolerance as well. The merchants were the permanent other. Their colorful clothes, Their strange music and their unique biology made them easy targets for the US versus them mentality of the Golden Order. The fundamentalists used the heresy accusation to tap into a natural, primitive fear of the stranger. They turned the merchants' neutrality into a form of active treason against the Erdtree. The Golden Order couldn't tolerate them because they were living proof that life could be meaningful without the grace of the state or the blessing of the fingers. A perfect system would have no need to fear a wandering caravan or a different song. The fact that the gods felt the need to bury these people alive proves that the Golden Order was a fragile and brittle thing. The merchants were the anomaly that proved the divine rule was a lie. They were the entropy that the Golden Order's logic couldn't handle. They had to be deleted because their existence was a standing challenge to the total dominance of the Erdtree. They were the only people who were truly free, and in Leyndell, freedom was the greatest heresy of all. Part 20. The irony. Their persecution created the thing they feared. The fate of the Great Caravan is a classic example of a self-fulfilling prophecy on a cosmic scale. Queen Marika and her fundamentalists were terrified of the Frenzied Flame more than almost any other force. They feared a god of chaos that would melt their order into a formless void. When Shabriri made his false accusation, the gods panicked. They believed that by rounding up the merchants and burying them in a stone tomb, they were preventing the arrival of this chaos. But the genocide was actually the ritual required to start the fire. The Golden Order provided the outer god with the exact ingredients it needed. Thousands of tortured souls in a state of absolute unified despair. The Three Fingers only had enough power to enter the world because the Golden Order created a nexus of suffering. Despair is the gravity of the Frenzied Flame. It pulls the chaos toward the world. By concentrating that much pain in one single location beneath the capital, Marika created a spiritual black hole. She unintentionally built the perfect temple for the god she was trying to avoid. If she had left the merchants alone to trade their goods and play their music, the flame might never have found a foothold in the lands between. The persecution was the summoning. This highlights the profound blindness of the Golden Order's logic. They believed that violence could be used to maintain peace, and that silence was the same thing as safety. They thought that by physically removing the victims, they were ending the problem for good. But you cannot just delete people in a world where souls and cosmic entities are real. Their energy and their hatred have to go somewhere. The mass grave became a massive battery for the apocalypse. Marika's fear created her own destruction. She literally paved the way for the Chaos God to sit directly beneath her throne. The sealed door in the shunning-grounds is the ultimate monument to this massive mistake. Marika put her own magical seal on the proscription, believing she had locked the door on chaos. But a god of entropy doesn't care about a lock or a ward. The seal only served to pressure cook the madness inside, ensuring it would only get hotter. It ensured the merchant's pain could never dissipate or find a natural end. The Order was so obsessed with containing the threat that it guaranteed the threat would become unstoppable. The prison was transformed into a power plant for the end of the world. The Golden Order's history is a series of failed prunings that always lead to bigger thorns. Every time they tried to cut away a part of the world they didn't like, they created a new and more dangerous monster. The Omens, the Misbegotten, and the Merchants are all children of the Order's own fear. The Frenzied Flame is simply the biggest and hottest of those monsters. Marika burned the world trying to save a tree. The ultimate irony is that the very people she tried to bury are the ones who will ensure her order never returns. Part 21. Kayle's despair. My people are all gone. Merchant. Kale is the only member of his people who survived with his mind completely intact, which makes his grief the most painful to witness. In his rare and haunting cut dialogue, he expresses the crushing weight of his survivor's guilt. He knows he is nothing more than a remnant of a dead world. He sits in the ruins of the church of Ella, selling trinkets to the tarnished while his brothers and sisters rot in a pit beneath the capital. He describes himself as a merchant of a dead nation. His colourful clothes are no longer a sign of rank or family. They are a funeral shroud he wears every single day. His isolation is a slow and agonizing form of death. He has no one left to play his music with, and no caravan to travel across the plains. He is nomadic in a world where there is nowhere left to go and no one left to meet him. Kale represents the human cost of the Golden Order's erasure. When he says his people are all gone, he isn't just talking about a series of deaths. He is talking about the end of a world. For Kale, the shattering was not the death of a prince or the breaking of a ring. It was the night his family was dragged away in chains. Kale's despair is quiet and dignified, which makes it all the more tragic. He doesn't scream or vomit fire like the others. He just sits by his fire and waits. This stillness is what makes him such a powerful figure in the lore. He is the last witness to a culture that was vibrant and full of life. He is the one who has to remember the names that have been reduced to bell bearings. He is the keeper of the songs that no one else wants to hear. He is a living ghost waiting for a tarnish to either save the world or end his misery. He is the memory the Golden Order failed to bury. The merchant's despair is a unique type of sadness in the game. It isn't the madness of the frenzy or the physical rot of the swamp. It is the cold and sober reality of being the last one left. Kale knows that even if a new lord rises and the sun shines again, his people are never coming back. The Great Caravan is extinct. This finality is what drives the lore toward the chaos ending. If the world is a place where Kale's people can be deleted without a trace, he doesn't want a new order. He wants a blank slate where no one can be forgotten again. Kale is the soul of this entire story. He is the one who makes the genocide feel real and personal. Without him, the mass grave in the sewers is just a grim lore location. With him, it is a family tragedy. His despair is the loudest silence in the lands between. He is a man who has nothing left but the road, and he has found that the road is empty. When you look at him in his red robes, you aren't just looking at a merchant. You are looking at the final, flickering ember of a people who were once the heartbeat of the world. Part 22. The Frenzy Incantations. Screaming, the pain of the buried. The physical and agonizing reality of the Frenzied Flame is seen in the incantations the player can use. Spells like the Flame of Frenzy, an unendurable frenzy, are not cast with the refined movements of a sorcerer or the holy prayers of a priest. They are screamed. The animation shows the player clutching their head in a spasm of pain as yellow fire bursts from their eyes and mouth. This is a direct mimicry of the merchant's physical state in the pit. It is the manifestation of a soul on fire. It represents the moment where internal pain becomes so great, it must become external destruction. These incantations are unique because they cause madness to the caster as well as the target. This reflects the suicidal and self-destructive nature of the merchant's revenge. They aren't trying to win a fight or gain an advantage. They are trying to melt the fighter and the world they stand on. The flame of frenzy is unfocused, wild, and impossible to control. It represents the chaotic energy of the caravan's final moments in the dark. It is the sound of thousands of voices screaming in unison. When you use these spells, you are channeling the collective agony of the buried alive. Inescapable frenzy is perhaps the most intimate and disturbing of these spells. The player grabs the target by the face and stares directly into their eyes, passing the madness into them like a physical infection. This is a communal experience of agony. It mirrors the way the three fingers grab the player to pass on the flame. It shows that the frenzy is not something you do to someone else. It is something you share with them. You are forcing the enemy to see exactly what the merchant saw in the dark. You are drowning them in the yellow ember of 1,000 lost lives. The unendurable frenzy incantation is the final stage of this total madness. The player vomits fire in a continuous stream until they collapse from exhaustion. This is the total consumption of the self for the sake of the chaos. The frenzied flame is a hungry god that doesn't empower its followers. It uses them as fuel for its own heat. The merchants in the pit were the first batch of this fuel. Every time you cast these spells, you are replaying their execution. You are screaming the pain of the people who were abandoned by the light. These incantations provide the mechanical link between the deep lore and the gameplay. They make the player feel the cost of the chaos. They turn a historical genocide into a usable weapon. The yellow fire is not holy, and it is not magic. It is concentrated, distilled despair. It is the sound of the pit made visible to the world above. When you use the flame of frenzy, you aren't a hero. You are a revenger who has decided the world should burn because the light of the Erd tree was used to hide a mass grave. Part 23. The Three Fingers Message. May chaos take the world. The core philosophy of the Three Fingers is summed up in a single, devastating command. May chaos take the world. This is not a villainous monologue or a plea for power. It is a metaphysical argument about the nature of existence. The Three Fingers explain that in the very beginning, everything in the universe was one. There was no birth, no death, and no concept of the self. There was only a primordial unity. The great mistake was the greater will introducing disparity into the world. By creating individual souls, the greater will created the capacity for individual suffering. The Three Fingers want to fix that mistake. The merchants are the perfect audience for this dark message. They have experienced the absolute worst of that disparity. They were divided from society, divided from their families, and divided from their own humanity. To them, the individual soul is not a gift or a blessing. It is a cage that keeps them trapped in their pain. The Three Fingers offer a release from that cage. They promise a return to the yellow ember where everything is merged into one. It is a form of nihilistic mercy. It is the peace of the grave applied to the entire universe. May chaos take the world is the final word of the people who were silenced. It is the direct answer to the Golden Order's wish for grace and guidance. One form of guidance leads to a throne built on the bones of the weak. The other leads to an ash heap where those bones are melted into the floor. The Three Fingers represent the ultimate logic of suffering. If to live is to suffer, then to not exist is the only logical good. The merchants reached the absolute bottom of the world, and they are the only ones who truly understand this desire for the end. This message serves as a direct challenge to the player's morality. It asks you to look at the slavery, the genocide, and the rot of the lands between, and ask if any of it is worth fixing. The Three Fingers argue that you cannot fix a foundation that is made of corpses. You have to melt it down and start over. Or rather, you shouldn't start again at all. They offer a finality that the Erd tree and the stars can never provide. They are the god of the no. They are the entity that puts an end to the story once and for all. This message is a radio signal that only the truly broken can hear. The merchants were the first to receive it, and they broadcast it to the rest of the world through their collective scream. When you choose the Frenzied Flame, you are agreeing with their message. You are saying yes to the chaos. You are ending the disparity of the world by ending the world itself. You are taking everything back to the One, ensuring that no one can ever be buried alive or shunned again. Part 24. Final verdict: the genocide that birthed a god. The story of the merchants is the most damning indictment of the Golden Order in the entire game. It proves that Marika's order was not a natural state of being. It was a forced reality built on the bones of a peaceful and vibrant culture. The Frenzied Flame is not a villainous force from the stars that came to destroy a good world. It is a reaction. It is the inevitable consequence of a society that chose to bury its problems alive rather than face them. The Three Fingers are the ghost of the Great Caravan. They are the god that grief built in the dark. This is a tragedy of absolute responsibility. The lords and the gods are the ones who created this chaos. They are the ones who provided the fuel for the fire. By trying to sanitize the world and remove the impure, they infected the very foundations of their capital. The frenzy is the pus of the Golden Order's own wounds. You cannot have a perfect golden light without creating an absolute and terrifying dark. The merchants were the shadow that Marika tried to step on, and that shadow eventually grew large enough to consume her entire kingdom. The story humanizes the apocalypse in a way few other games do. In most fantasy, the end of the world is a meaningless disaster or a move by a distant demon. In Elden Ring, it has a name, a music, and a reason. It is the merchant's revenge. It is the singing nomads finally having the last word in a world that tried to silence them. This makes the Frenzied Flame ending the most poetic and honest choice available. It is the conclusion where the least of the world becomes the most powerful. It is the final revolution of the melted. The genocide that birthed a god is the core truth of Leyndell. The sacred city is nothing more than a gilded grave. The Erd Tree is a golden parasite feeding on the souls of the dead. The merchants are the truth that was sealed away behind a magically warded door. When you unseal that door, you are unsealing the true history of the lands between. You are releasing the suffering the gods tried to hide from the sun. Order is just a polite word for violence, and in the end, chaos is the only honest answer left to give. The merchants are gone, but their song will burn as long as the world remains. The Frenzied Flame is the eternal flame of their lament. It is the genocide that birthed a god, and that God is now coming for the rest of the world. May chaos take the world, because the Golden Order was never enough to save the people it claimed to protect. The fire is finally here, and it is the only thing that can wash the world clean of the crimes of the gods.